If you want to know how NDIS legislation can help you or your loved one at home or in intensive care or in hospital to get the right level of NDIS funding for critical care nurses at home, stay tuned. I've got news for you. My name is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com. And today I've got a real treat for you, especially if you are in the NDIS space or if you have a family member that needs NDIS and needs critical care nurses because they're ventilated, they have a tracheostomy, they need TPN, they need IV infusions, IV antibiotics, anything that's complex like BiPAP, CPAP, palliative care at home and so forth. Today I've got a real treat for you. So in a nutshell, our clients, generally speaking, get funding for 24-hour critical care nurses, whether that's through the NDIS or through the TAC or through the DVA or any other funding bodies. But obviously the biggest bulk of client inquiries and funding is coming through the NDIS nowadays, right? And in recent years, we were always told from some, not from all NDIS support coordinators, that there's not enough funding for these clients and that the NDIS wouldn't fund nursing care, which is basically a lie. And people have died because of it, because of the incompetence of NDIS support coordinators. But in all honesty, also because we didn't understand NDIS legislation 100%. So now one of our NDIS support coordinator, Simon, who used to work for the NDIS as an NDIS planner, told us, you've been doing it all wrong. The funding has always been there for your clients as long as registered nurses, doctors can make a risk assessment and say, look, these clients need 24-hour nursing care with critical care nurses because of their disability leading to a health condition that requires 24-hour nursing care with critical care nurses, then the NDIS has no choice but funding it. Now, we have put this already to the test in recent months, and clearly the NDIS has been funding it based on our risk assessment, and literally that has been happening overnight. Now, to provide the evidence that what I'm saying is accurate, we have actually also sought some legal advice, and we have engaged a well-known Melbourne healthcare lawyer who has done the research for us, and I will read out today what the lawyer says. So, dear Patrick, advice regarding NDIS emergency care without funding. Thank you for your instructions in relation to this matter. We confirm that Intensive Care at Home Proprietary Limited provides NDIS care to acutely unwell participants, such as requiring ventilation, tracheostomy, BiPAP, CPAP ventilation without tracheostomy, tracheostomy care without ventilation, home TPN, home IV potassium, home IV magnesium infusions, home IV antibiotics, PEC, patch tube, nasogastric tube management at home, as well as ventilation weaning at home, as well as palliative care at home. The care provided by intensive care at home can be life-sustaining, and at times the participant's NDIS budget doesn't have the funds to provide for additional urgent care. You understand that where this kind of care is required, intensive care at home can provide this care and will be guaranteed reimbursement for services from the National Disability Insurance Agency. You have sought clarification on the legislative basis for your understanding. We note that the NDIS is currently undergoing reform, so this advice could be impacted when new rules are released. We recommend you instruct us to review and update it when this occurs or otherwise in 6 months. Summary. Number one, there is a legislative basis for intensive care at home to claim from the NDIA when the plan has been exceeded if payment is necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to an individual's life, health, safety, or well-being. Number two, we have set out some matters that will assist you in evidencing this. However, we note that these should be further considered in light of the legislative review that is underway. Number three, however, seeking a reimbursement is ultimately at the discretion of the NDIA CEO, so there's no guarantee that this payment will be made even if the care does meet this criteria. Given the type of services you are providing, it is likely you will be able to get a reimbursement. However, there will always be a small risk. Number four, when a risk is identified and time permits, you should encourage the participant or their authorized representative to at least apply to seek a variation to the NDIS plan. If your staff have doubt about whether the supports being provided would satisfy the NDIA, intensive care at home should consider transferring the participant to hospital while funding can be approved. Recommendations. To assist in a claim for emergency funding, intensive care at home should specifically consider and document consideration of the following. A, that the supports are necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to the participant's life, health, or safety, and in particular that the participant would suffer harm or neglect if the supports are not provided. That the supports relate to the participant's disability rather than general health condition, which is something that I said in the beginning. And C, if applicable, document why there are exceptional circumstances for why you need to provide the supports. This additional criteria may not be necessary once the rules are released. However, we recommend you attempt to meet this threshold where possible. Number 7, this is of course additional to any clinical matters you would ordinarily consider. Number 8, we suggest intensive care at home develops a document to ensure that consideration of each of the above criteria is specifically undertaken and documented, again, in addition to other clinical matters you would ordinarily consider. And I can say we have already done that with our nursing assessments that we are doing on a regular basis. Number 9, if time permits, we recommend that this assessment be undertaken by an independent clinician rather than an intensive care at home employee. However, this is not critical. And I can say that whenever we can outsource it, we will, to an independent registered nurse with a critical care nursing background. However, there are times when the matter is so urgent that we need to provide this assessment in-house. And also, as much as the advice says it is, any payment is subject to approval from the NDIS CEO, so far we haven't had any issue. And also, if the NDIS CEO wouldn't approve it, we would alert the general public, including the media, especially if the risk assessment is accurate and the NDIS would refuse and deliberately harm one of their participants. Next. Advice number 11. The National Disability and Insurance Scheme Act 2013 sets out circumstances in which the NDIS must not pay an amount to a person in relation to a plan. Number 1, the NDIS is not permitted to pay an NDIS amount if the payment would result in the total amount of flexible funding in a plan being exceeded, including for a funding period, or B, the total amount of funding for a stated support in a plan being exceeded, including for a funding period. This is for a new framework plan. For a participant's old framework plan, the NDIS is not permitted to pay an NDIS amount to a person if the payment would result in a total funding amount or a total component amount in a participant's plan being exceeded, including in relation to a funding period. Details of this are set out below. A, if payment would result in one of the following for a new framework plan. Number 1, the total amount of flexible funding provided under the plan exceeding the total funding amount specified in the plan. That's National Disability and Insurance Scheme Act 2013, Section 45(4), GVH-M, and I'll save you the boring details of the numbers. The total amount of flexible funding provided under the plan during a funding period exceeding the amount of funding that is to be provided under the plan during the funding period. The total amount of funding provided under the plan for the stated support or class of stated supports exceeding any total funding amount specified in the plan under paragraph 32G. The total amount of funding provided under the plan for the stated support or class of stated supports during funding period for the support or class of supports exceeding the amount of funding that is to be provided under the plan during the funding period for the support or class of supports. If payment would result in one of the following for an old framework plan, the total amount of funding provided under the plan for reasonable and necessary supports exceeding the total funding amount specified in the plan, the total amount of funding provided under the plan for reasonable and necessary supports in a group of supports to which a funding component amount relates exceeding that funding component amount. If the plan specifies funding periods for all reasonable and necessary supports funded under the plan, taken as a whole, the total amount of funding provided under the plan for such supports during a funding period exceeding the amount of funding for such supports that is to be provided under the plan during the funding period. If the plan specifies funding periods for one or more groups of reasonable and necessary supports, the total amount of funding provided under the plan for supports in such a group during a funding period for that group exceeding the amount of funding for supports in that group is to be provided under the plan during the funding period. However, Section 45(5) states the above will not apply if the CEO is satisfied that making the payment is necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to an individual's life, health, or safety. If the CEO is so satisfied, they can approve a payment to intensive care at home for additional funding. For the purpose of this advice, we refer to this as refund reason. What this phrase means isn't defined in the legislation in this context. Now, what I can say so far, as soon as we knew that legislation is actually supportive of our approach, we have put this to the test with some clients, and so far, no payments have been, we have been paid, and that is a really positive sign that the NDIS is actually working according to their legislation. Now, the legal advice here continues. However, the explanatory memorandum to the NDIS Act, which assists in interpreting the legislation, may be helpful in further interpreting what this means. In reference to this section, the explanatory memorandum states that CEO must be satisfied that there are, in quotes, exceptional circumstances, as set out in the rules, justifying the making of the payment amount without varying or replacing the participant's plan. It further states that the CEO will be able to top up plans if satisfied exceptional circumstances exist, which must be specified in NDIS rules. These exemptions will ensure no participant is left without critical support. The rules that relate to this are not currently out. We say this may be useful as it is not clear whether this aspect of the explanatory memorandum actually applies in your situation. Establishing that the supports are necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to an individual's life, health, or safety may be sufficient even if there are no exceptional circumstances. This will become clearer if, and then there's some paragraphs of the NDIS legislation quoted, 12, 13, 14, and I'll bore you with the details, and I'll save you the boring details once the relevant rules have been released. Presuming intensive care at home, the rules will apply even where the CEO is satisfied that there are exceptional circumstances. The wording suggests that payment of the funding is discretionary because it does not state that the CEO must approve a top-up payment. Despite this, we consider that it would be unlikely the CEO would decline a request for funding if the criteria are satisfied. When will the rules be released? The NDIS is currently undergoing a reform under the new National Disability Insurance Scheme Amendment, Getting the NDIS Back on Track Number 1 Act 2024, new category D rules, relevant rules will be released. The Minister has stated that reforms will commence from July 2025. From the information available, these rules will include what other circumstances the CEO might take into account in deciding to pay an amount that exceeds the funding of a plan under Section 45(5), and thus provide more clarity for you. As above, it is not clear whether the rules will apply to your situation. What to do until these rules are released? The rules don't apply to the refund reason. In absence of the rules, you have to prove that the supports of payment are necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to an individual's life, health, or safety, and potentially that there are exceptional circumstances. These terms are not defined rules, and there are no cases that have considered Section 45(5), but it's difficult to say definitely how the NDIA or a tribunal/court might approach this. There are cases which look at whether a participant can be reimbursed where they were out of pocket. In those cases, the tribunal/court confirmed it didn't have the power to order a reimbursement, even in a case where the tribunal found the extra supports organized by the participant to be reasonable and necessary. In one case, the full federal court observed that the phrase reasonable and necessary cannot supports which meets the threshold which justifies by reference to the context, objects, and guiding principles to the NDIS Act and the facts of the case, the expenditure 1819 of public funds for that support for a particular participant. In another case, exceptional circumstances was discussed in the context of whether it was necessary for a family member to provide overnight care to a participant 7 days a week. Although this is not a similar situation, the commentary is useful as a guide for how the phrase exceptional circumstances should be interpreted. The tribunal made reference to operational guidelines, which states that an exceptional circumstance for allowing a family member to provide care would be where there is a risk of harm or neglect to the participant. In discussing what exceptional circumstances meant, the tribunal accepted the NDIS submissions, which said the following. In Carr versus Western Australia, the High Court stated that the phrase exceptional circumstances should be given a meaning appropriate to the context in which it appears. National Disability Agency versus WRMF in 2020, Kluwer versus National Disability Insurance Agency 2022, Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, the High Court held quite what will amount to exceptional circumstances is inherently incapable of exhaustive statements. The word exceptional in such a context is not a term of art, but an ordinary familiar English adjective. To be exceptional, a circumstance need to be unique or unprecedented or very rare, but it cannot be one that is regularly or routinely or normally encountered. Given this, we recommend when assessing whether care or services that exceed the budget are reasonable, intensive care at home specifically consider and document that the supports are necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to the participant's life, health, or safety, and in particular whether harm and neglect to the participant would arise if the support is not provided in connection with the participant's disability rather than general health conditions, and where applicable and if possible that there are exceptional circumstances to provide the supports, being that the circumstance is not one that is regularly or normally encountered. And like I said to you, as much as we're going through all this legal jargon here, so far we have put this to the test because our clients are the most vulnerable clients on the NDIS scheme. They're ventilated, they have a tracheostomy, right? They often have conditions such as motor neuron disease, ventilation with a tracheostomy, cerebral palsy, ventilation with tracheostomy, or cerebral palsy, ventilation without a tracheostomy like BiPAP, CPAP, seizure management, PEG, patch tube management, home TPN, home IV potassium, home IV magnesium infusions via PIG line, Hickman's line, central line, or port management. Those clients cannot go without a critical care nurse. That is assuming that the health condition is secondary to their disability that is listed on the NDIS scheme as being eligible for funding. The above are taken from NDIS legislation and tribunal commentary. We recommend you include further more clinical assessment criteria in addition to considering these matters. NDIS amends as stated above. The NDIS is currently undergoing reform. One key aspect of the reform is that more clearly defined supports that are and aren't permitted. Last year, the Department of Social Services released a draft list of NDIS supports and services that are not acceptable under the new NDIS Act, but our clients always get funding if the disabilities that are listed on the NDIS website that are eligible for NDIS funding lead to a secondary health condition that requires, in our cases, ventilation, tracheostomy, BiPAP, CPAP ventilation without tracheostomy, tracheostomy without ventilation, IV infusions, the things that I just mentioned. As you would be aware, mainstream health services are currently not considered NDIS supports and therefore cannot be claimed. The draft support list notes that supports relating to diagnosis or treating health conditions would not be allowed, as well as nursing services where related to treatment of a health event. And we are well aware of that. Like I said, all of our NDIS clients that need 24-hour nursing care with critical care nurses, they only need that because the disability is causing the health conditions. We also note that although the support list is currently in draft form, it is largely consistent with the current scheme, considering the rules already state that the NDIS will not fund the diagnosis and clinical treatment of health conditions, including ongoing or chronic health conditions or other activities that aim to improve the health status of Australians, including general practitioner services, medical specialist services, dental care, nursing, allied health services, including acute and post-acute. Now, preventative healthcare in public and private hospitals and pharmaceuticals or other universal entitlements or funding time-limited goal-oriented services and therapies, where the predominant purpose is treatment directly related to the person's health status or provided after a recent medical or surgical event with the aim of improving the person's functional status, including rehabilitation or post-acute care or palliative care. As such, it will be important that intensive care at home continue to demonstrate that the emergency supports provided relate to the person's disability rather than a health condition. Who should do the assessments? We note that we have been unable to determine the assessment should be conducted by an independent practitioner or whether intensive care at home staff can complete this. In our opinion, having a third party assess the situation may be more convincing in showing that the support is necessary, that there are exceptional circumstances due to the fact they may appear more objective. However, we appreciate time may not permit this, and having a third party assess the situation should not be prioritized over urgent and necessary care. Given intensive care at home's clinical staff have legislated professional standards, such as APRA, their clinical opinion will hold weight. Next, variations to the plan. If time permits, we recommend you encourage the participant or their representative to apply for urgent emergency funding rather than rely on the NDIS reimbursing you. And I can only repeat and stress the fact that APRA is the regulator and not the NDIS. The NDIS can say all day long, there is no funding, there is no funding. Number one, you need to understand the legislation, which will always support the conditions and the services that NDIS participants need. And number two, an APRA registered nurse or an APRA registered doctor cannot make up things, right? They are factual things according to their profession. Next, the advice continues. As you are in no doubt aware, a variation of the participant's reasonable and necessary budget can occur in various circumstances, including relevantly where A, the CEO is satisfied that the participant requires crisis or emergency funding as a result of a significant change to the participant support's needs, or the CEO is satisfied that the variation is necessary to prevent or lessen a threat to the participant's life, health, or safety, whether current or future. We appreciate that seeking a variation might be a lengthy process and would not be retrospectively applied. Whether this is preferable to relying on Section 45.5 for obvious reasons. Risks, as set out above, whether the NDIS pays intensive care home for services provided beyond the scope of the budget is discretionary, as the CEO must be satisfied of its need, and this is not currently defined. Like I said, so far we have been paid by putting this to the test. Our clients are way too vulnerable and people can die if they're not getting the critical care nurses for all the reasons that I mentioned. It would be a bit like, if our clients would go back to hospital, they wouldn't have a support worker in a hospital. So why would they have a support worker at home? Because that condition hasn't changed. The advice continues. Based on your instructions, it would seem the care you are providing would be considered necessary to prevent or lessen an imminent threat to an individual's life, health, or safety. However, this cannot be guaranteed. Further, it seems that the court's tribunal may not have the powers to overturn such a decision, although it has not been tested. One reason that the NDIS could refuse to pay for services may be that they consider that the plan was sufficient and that what was reasonable and necessary was already included in the plan. Intensive care at home should include as much information as possible to evidence why the services was necessary and beyond the scope of the budget, but specifically addressing the points outlined above. If your staff are unclear whether the supports required would meet the threshold but have assessed that the participant needs further support, then intensive care at home will need to determine whether the participant should be transferred to a hospital or whether intensive care at home is willing to risk being unable to claim for the services provided. We do not recommend staff leave a participant alone or with persons who are not clinically trained if they have assessed the participant's needs clinical care or further support to mitigate death or injury. And that's what it comes down to. If our clients don't get the 24-hour nursing care, they are often at risk of dying or going back to hospital, and the cost would be double when they go back to ICU, right? Like I said, what we provide is a win-win situation. So what does this all mean? What it all means is, for example, I'll give you some tangible examples. In the past, we would have been told by NDIS support coordinators in particular that there is no funding despite overwhelming clinical evidence for 24-hour critical care nurses for NDIS participants with ventilation, tracheostomy, etc. Right? That's what we've been told. Now, the legislation clearly supports the approach that whenever a participant is at risk as part of their disability leading to a health condition that requires ventilation, tracheostomy, tracheostomy without ventilation, ventilation without tracheostomy, conditions like home TPN, or conditions that lead to home TPN, the need for IV infusions, IV potassium, IV magnesium, IV antibiotics, or port management, central line management, Hickman's and PICC line management, as well as patch tube, etc., that the NDIS will fund this. And like I said, we have put this to the test already. Of course, like any legal advice, there's always the small print and always, identifying the risk. But what we've also found now by taking this approach, the NDIS will actually not let the clients hang. The NDIS legislation is actually there to support clients. So what does it all mean? What it all means really is if you are watching this and you have a family member in a situation, or you're watching this, you're a participant yourself, we can get you critical care nurses 24 hours a day if you need to, right? You let us make an assessment. We can do it in-house, and we are allowed to do that as APRA registered nurses. We also have our own, we can also get doctors involved, OTs and so forth. Or we can get, if time permits, an independent assessor. We have a network of independent assessors. Also, if you are in a hospital and you're watching this, or your family member is in a hospital stuck in ICU or on a respiratory ward, and you don't know what to do next, how to get home, how to access the NDIS scheme, please reach out to us. Or you don't know how to top up your NDIS plan, if you need more specialized care that we provide, just reach out to us. We can help you there very quickly, and we've done so many times for our clients. So with intensive care at home, we're currently sending all our critical care nurses into the home 24 hours a day. Therefore, we are providing a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in intensive care for ventilation, tracheostomy, home BiPAP, home CPAP ventilation without tracheostomy, tracheostomy without ventilation, home TPN, home IV potassium infusions, home IV magnesium infusions, IV fluids and IV antibiotics. We're also providing ventilation weaning at home. We're also providing central line, peak line, Hickman's line management, as well as port management at home. We're also providing nasogastric tube, PEG and pitch tube management at home, as well as palliative care services at home. We're also sending our critical care nurses into the home for emergency department bypass services. We have done so successfully as part of the Western Sydney Local Area Health District, their In Touch program, saving approximately $2,000 per patient that we keep at home instead of going to the emergency department. We're also in a position to cut the cost of an intensive care bed by around 50%. An intensive care bed costs around $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day. Our service costs between $2,500 to $3,000 per bed day. And we're freeing up the most sought after bed in the hospital, which is the ICU bed. Most importantly, we're improving the quality of life for patients and their families, which is a win-win situation for all stakeholders. With intensive care at home, we're currently operating all around Australia in all major capital cities, as well as in all regional and rural areas. We're an NDIS approved service provider all around Australia, TAC and WorkSafe in Victoria, iCare in New South Wales, NIISQ in Queensland, the Department of Veteran Affairs, DVA all around Australia. Our clients and we as a provider have also received funding through public hospitals, private health funds, as well as departments of health. We're the only service provider in Australia that has achieved third-party accreditation for intensive care at home in 2025. We have been achieving this high level of accreditation since 2012. No other provider has achieved this high level of accreditation in the community and has created more intellectual property for intensive care at home nursing than we have. This puts us in a position to employ hundreds of years of critical care nursing experience combined in the community. No other service provider in 2025 employs a higher skill level in the community than we do, which enables us to look after the highest acuity adults and children in the community in Australia safely. And if you're at home already and you're watching this and you realize you don't have the right level of support, or if you're stuck in an ICU long term, or if your family member is stuck in an ICU long term, I'll give you a very tangible example today. One of our first clients about 10 years ago, when we first got started, was a client who was at home initially on a ventilator with a tracheostomy with a support worker model 24/7. Of course, support workers cannot look after a client at home on a ventilator with a tracheostomy safely. That is like flying the airplane with the cabin crew instead of the pilot, because anyone on a ventilator with a tracheostomy is at very high risk of medical emergencies or dying if they don't have a team of critical care nurses looking after them 24/7. This is evidence-based and is documented in our mechanical home ventilation guidelines that you can find on our website. Think about it. In an intensive care in a hospital, you wouldn't have support workers look after a critical care patient on a ventilator with a tracheostomy. So why would anyone in their right mind do that in a home care environment in the community? So eventually this client found out about us and the intensive care unit found out about us, and we were proving our concept with this client very fast. When we worked with the client, we sent him intensive care nurses 24 hours a day. He never went back into ICU ever again, and we were proving our concept there very fast. We can do the same for you if you're not safe at home, which includes the advocacy for funding that goes along with it, which ties in with today's topic. We have always successfully advocated for our clients, otherwise we would not be in business. The same is applicable for those stuck in ICU, similar to our case. To what you're looking for, reach out to us, we'll make it happen for you as well. We can take you through the right steps. This is also why we are providing level 2 and level 3 NDIS support coordination. We have a team of NDIS support coordinators and they have a wealth of knowledge. I've done an interview with Amanda Richards, one of our NDIS support coordinators, and I'll put a link to an interview with Amanda in the written version of this blog. Below the video, we're also providing TAC case management and WorkSafe case management in Victoria with Lucy McCodder. And if you're an NDIS support coordinator or a case manager from another organization watching this and you're looking for nursing care for your participants, please reach out to us as well. If you're looking for funding for nursing care for your participants and you don't know how to go about it and what evidence to provide, I encourage you to reach out to us as well. We can help you with the right level of funding and with the right level of advocacy. We're also providing NDIS specialist nursing assessments done by critical care nurses with a legal nurse consulting background. And if you are a critical care nurse and you're looking for a career change and you want to join a very progressive, dynamic, and high-performing team of critical care nurses in the community, we are employing hundreds of years of critical care nursing experience combined. And if you're looking for a career change, we're currently hiring for jobs for critical care nurses in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, in Albury, Wodonga, in Bendigo, in Geelong, and in Warragul in Victoria. If you have worked in critical care nursing for a minimum of 2 years, pediatric ICU, ED, and you have already completed a postgraduate critical care nursing qualification, we will be absolutely delighted hearing from you. I have a disclaimer. Because we are offering a tailor-made solution for our clients, which includes regular staff, our clients also do want the same staff coming over and over again because they are so vulnerable and so special. That's why we need regular staff. So if you're looking for agency work where you can come and go, this will not be the right fit for you. We're looking for consistency and our clients are looking for consistency. So please only apply with us if you can give us regular and consistent availability for shifts and you're really keen on building relationships with us and with our clients. And if you're an intensive care specialist or an ED specialist, we also want to hear from you. We're currently expanding our medical team as well. We can help you eliminate your bed blocks in ICU, ED, and for your long-term patients, or for your regularly readmitting patients with our critical care nursing team at home. We're here to help you take the pressure off your ICU and ED beds, and in most cases, you won't even pay for it. Even if you do pay for it, it is so much more cost-effective than what you're paying in ICU and ED for, and you get the same level of care and more patient satisfaction. And if you're a hospital executive watching this and you have bed blocks in your ICU, ED, and respiratory wards, home TPN, of course, please reach out to us as well. We can help you eliminate your bed blocks fast. If you're in the US or in the UK and you're watching this and you need help, we want to hear from you as well. We can help you there privately with one-on-one consulting and hiring nurses privately. Once again, our website is intensivecareathome.com. Call us on one of the numbers on the top of our website or simply send us an email to info@intensivecareathome.com. And if you like my videos, subscribe to my YouTube channel for regular updates for families with intensive care at home and intensive care. Click the like button, click the notification bell, share this video with your friends and families, and comment below what you think about this video and what you want to see next. Thank you so much for watching. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com, and I will talk to you in a few days. Take care for now.